Pilsen Zoo is known as one of the most species-rich zoos in the entire world, and accordingly it's also home to countless rarities and offers many special encounters. Still, it's only a medium-sized zoo, which already made me worry beforehand that it might be rather cramped to the detriment of the animals. If you want to find out if that's really the case and also what makes Pilsen Zoo special beyond its rare animals, you have come to the right place. So welcome to what is already the 4th stop on my journey through the zoos of the Czech Republic. But before we get started, I just have to know, which animals would you most like to see in such a species-rich zoo? As for me, I would really love to see proboscis monkeys someday. Those can't be found in Pilsen, but nevertheless, because of its incredible diversity in species, Pilsen, along with Prague, was right at the top of my to-do list here in the Czech Republic. Yet, looking at the rather modest entrance area, you'd hardly expect this to be one of the country's most remarkable zoos. But just past the entrance, there's already something that catches your eye. And I think you can all tell right away, this Barbar Lion enclosure is fairly new, built in 2022 to be exact. What stands out most is the design around it, which fittingly follows a Moroccan theme. Thanks to the many viewing areas, you can also observe the pride here really well. And as you can see, it's quite a large group. That's because in 2023 quadruples were born, which is of course wonderful news, especially considering that Barbary lions are extinct in the wild. Overall though, I'd say the enclosure is just okay. Not because it's too small, but because the structure and layout feel a bit plain to me. The hills could have been more pronounced and higher platforms would have given the lions a better view of their surroundings. So it's missing that little extra something to make it a truly great lion exhibit, and that's a shame, especially since the indoor area, at least the part visible to visitors, doesn't really impress me either. It's located inside the first truly species-rich building of the zoo. In the very first room you'll also find the indoor enclosures of the giraffe mongooses, which I liked a lot more, mainly because they can use a second level here. And these Smith's bush squirrels are actually the first real rarity of the visit, kept in only 4 zoos across Europe. Further inside, the building features a nocturnal section, and since such houses are generally quite rare, it's no surprise that there are plenty more unusual species here. 4-toed hedgehogs are still surprisingly common, and genets and aardvarks aren't the rarest either. But gannets, greater galagos for example, are only kept in 7 zoos in Europe, and Palawan porcupines only in 8. Just like Seurat's spiny mice, which you might remember from my video about Frankfurt Zoo. Mitchau's mole rats can only be found in 3 zoos across Europe, and with Prague and Osnabrück I have actually already seen all of them already. However, I had never seen a marsh mongoose before, and I was quite lucky to see them here because now you can only find them in 1 zoo in Poland. And I also got to see West African tree hyraxes for the very first time, since outside 4 zoos in the Czech Republic, no other zoo in the world has them, according to Zootierliste. You might already know my issue with nocturnal houses. Because of the reversed day-night cycle, the animals can't have outdoor enclosures. And while the enclosures for smaller animals, like those for mice, are still fairly spacious, all the others feel way too cramped to me. And I'm really glad that I was correct that the marsh mongoose enclosure was probably only a temporary setup, so at least it was only temporarily terrible. At least the other mongoose species not in the nocturnal section have some really nice outdoor habitats. Bat-eared foxes also live here, and their enclosure looked quite good as well. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see the last black-backed jackal, which sadly now has passed away. From here the path leads past several aviaries. Here you will find birds from Australia and New Zealand, like the New Zealand scaups, wonga pigeons, kiwis and Australian booboos. Wait, did I just say kiwis? Yes, there are really kiwis here, but of course they didn't show themselves. But we had more luck with another rarity. This is a common brush-tail possum, a species that has actually become a bit more common in some German zoos as well. However, I really didn't like this enclosure here at all. It's basically just a small little chamber. Next door there was also a dusky pedimelon, and with that we've arrived at the kangaroos, which are represented here by quite a few species. Grey and red kangaroos, Parma wallabies, swamp wallabies and red-necked wallabies. Opposite the kangaroos is the chimpanzee enclosure, where a crowd had gathered because it was feeding time. As you can see, the outdoor area, separated by a moat, is unfortunately rather small in size. And sadly, both trees are secured so that the animals can't climb them, even though it doesn't really look like they could escape that way anyway. The enclosure is filled with logs and even artificial termite mounds, but the climbing structures aren't very complex or tall. And the indoor area of the chimpanzees not only looks quite old-fashioned with its tiled walls, but also rather cramped. And with such limited floor space, even the height of the indoor area doesn't make much of a difference. At least you can see that there's also an additional holding area here. I don't really have any complaints about the indoor enclosure of the red-handed tamarins. It's actually quite decent. Their outdoor area, however, is a case in point for how much more you could get out of such a small space with a cage, especially for small monkeys. In the house you will also find Galapagos giant tortoises. Their indoor area is also perfectly fine, and it seems like they can be let outside. I've been told that they used to live together with ring-tailed lemurs, which explains the climbing logs left in the enclosure. So maybe you could now let the tamarins cross over there? That would be great. The really well-designed terrariums for reticulated pythons and Mertens water monitors already give the first hint that there's much more to see here. And just around the corner it becomes clear that this building is, once again, incredibly species rich. First of all, there are numerous aviaries on the left. Fortunately, all the birds here have outdoor aviaries as well. They are not particularly large or beautiful, but at least they exist. And there are some really interesting species here, including rarities like the Palawan hornbill, although the perhaps understated Philippine metallic pigeon, held in only 3 zoos in Europe, is actually the rarest here. On the other side, there are also numerous terrariums housing a variety of snakes, such as Mengshan pit vipers, Ethiopian mountain adders, or black-headed bushmasters. But that was really just a small selection. There are quite a few species here, and fortunately all in very nice, spacious terrariums, just the way you want to see them. The path then continues into a small tropical house where the dense planting and misting system, as you can see, create a very fitting atmosphere. There are also free-flying butterflies here, but again, reptile enthusiasts will be especially happy, as Philippine sailfin lizards, grace monitors and Philippine crocodiles can be found here. I actually have to say though that I found the various frogs here almost even more exciting. Outside again, there happened to be a Japanese cultural event taking place, which was really cool. The zoo also has a large amphitheater with 7,000 seats, which can be used for events. As you can see, a birds of prey show also takes place here during the summer months. It's way more interactive than most other flying shows I've seen. I personally got to lie down on the stage and capture this amazing shot. Overall though, I found it to be quite slow-paced, but that might be just because it was all in Czech and I didn't understand a word. For now, we stay with the bird life, as next we visit 2 aviaries, both more or less walk through. For the flamingos, you effectively enter a small antechamber from which you can then look into the aviary. And at the penguins, the path also doesn't go through the enclosure itself, but with a bit of luck you can still get very close to the animals. Even though both aviaries are relatively simple in design, I think they work well, and the flamingo aviary in particular is actually quite appealing. Now we made a small loop and returned past the entrance. As you can see, there are some more aviaries here, housing some exciting, rarely held species like greater Vasa parrots and Goliath herons. But what's even more exciting are the animals you could theoretically see in this really beautiful naturalistic enclosure. Sadly though, neither the pygmy hippos in the water nor the Tanzanian black and white colobuses in the trees did show themselves. Along the really impressive spacious enclosure, the path then leads to a building which houses the indoor areas for the pygmy hippos, and at least here we did see one of them. Opposite, there's also an aviary with some really beautiful African bird species, and beyond the building it becomes clear that some of the enclosures in Pilsen do have quite a decent or even impressive size. The African savannah enclosure, which you view across a wide water moat, is also very idyllic thanks to the dense greenery surrounding it, making it a lot of fun to watch the animals here. On the other side of the path is an enclosure for cheetahs. It's also separated by a water moat, but at best medium-sized, and structurally and in terms of furnishing, I found it rather boring. Just beyond the first savannah enclosure, there's another one for African hoofstock, where you will also find the giraffes. They were mostly active in front of their house during our visit. The long-necked residents here share their space with greater kudus and blessboks, and even though this enclosure can't compete with the largest African savannah habitats in size, it's still decent and once again a real eye-catcher. The previously mentioned building can't be entered from this side, but later from the other side you can look through glass panels into the stalls of the various hoofed animals. And I always appreciate it when you can at least partially look into stable buildings like this. Here we are looking at the nyalas, which live in a very narrow space between the giraffes and the larger African savannah enclosure. And looking at it from above, I can't help but wonder, did they really need to be squeezed in here? Couldn't they have joined the left or right enclosure instead? Anyway, inside the building you can also see in the giraffes indoor space, and here I have to say, sure, there are larger indoor enclosures elsewhere. The floor is fully concrete. It's not perfect, but also far from being the worst. Pretty middle of the road, especially considering giraffes have only been at Pilsen since 2010. Interestingly, I actually found some plans for a new giraffe enclosure. These plans are from students, but the expansion area on a meadow across from the zoo is apparently going to be developed. According to older plans, elephants are also supposed to move in there, but I have no idea if that's still the case or if they will actually build something new for giraffes. In any case, the building doesn't just house the giraffes indoor area, but also several other enclosures. One of them is a mixed species exhibit you can view from 2 levels. Here you can find Cape ground squirrels, rock hyraxes, as well as red-billed hornbills and superb starlings. There's also a glass tunnel system for naked mole rats, and the cute Senegal galagos are here too. Directly connected is another building where on one side you can once again see a whole range of birds. Among them are blue-headed quail doves and lesser birds of paradise, although I only spotted the less colorful female. Opposite is the indoor area for the Indian rhinoceroses, which is visually rather pragmatic but serves its purpose thanks to the indoor pool as well. Here as well you can definitely say that the outdoor enclosure is visually much more pleasing, and the Indian rhinos, much like the giraffes, have also been at Pilsen since 2010. Since then, the only Indian rhinos in the Czech Republic have successfully bred twice. When you breed these rhinos, you need at least 2 outdoor areas to be able to separate them. I think you can see quite clearly how it's all laid out in this shot. But at the back there's also a holding area for or black-buck antelopes, which can probably also be led over to the rhinos. I really like that the Indian rhinos here can also access this pond, where, as you can see, there's a monkey island in the middle with wanderoos, which is geographically quite fitting. There's another monkey island as well, home to northern white-cheeked gibbons, and here the contrast between outdoor and indoor areas is especially noticeable. Behind the Indian rhinos, you'll also find several aviaries with birds from the temperate zone. With species like Barrow's golden eyes or bearded reedlings, you will find some real rarities here. These grey wagtails, for example, are only kept in 4 zoos worldwide according to Zootierliste. A little further along, you can step into a walk-through aviary in a log cabin style, immersing yourself in a Siberian forest with some interesting bird species. Eurasian siskins, for example, are quite nice to see, even though they are not particularly rare. That, on the other hand, does apply to the white-bearded masked palm civet, a civet species from Southeast Asia kept in only 10 European collections. But let's be honest, most visitors will probably be more excited about the cute red pandas next door. And yet, even though the Saros cranes loudly demand our attention, we move past their enclosures rather quickly, heading towards the big cat exhibits, where we are first greeted by a North Chinese leopard. It lives here in a medium-sized enclosure that certainly stands out for its natural design and hillside location. But at the same time, things could be significantly improved in terms of furnishing, with some platforms and climbing structures. Next door, I managed to get some really great footage. As you can see, a snow leopard was fiercely wrestling with its meal. At first glance, the snow leopard enclosure doesn't look particularly large either, but when we tilt the camera upwards, it becomes clear this habitat stands out for its verticality. And when you later get a look from above, it's even more apparent. For a species native to the Himalayas, this is an incredibly well-structured exhibit. Still, I wouldn't call it outstanding, especially since there's a pair living here, and if they ever need to be separated, the holding area is rather modest. It's a pity that even with such an amazing setting, I can't quite get enthusiastic about it. The 2 enclosures for Siberian tigers are located further down the slope in a somewhat flatter area. Next to a very nice, appropriately themed little restaurant, you get a great overview of the front enclosure. Down below, there is also a viewing window offering a solid look into the enclosure, though no tiger showed up while we were there. This lower section also houses an aquarium with sturgeons. In this part of the park, you'll also find several hoostock enclosures. Next to the Indian rhinos, the Bactrian camels live in an area that was still a bit under construction during our visit. I found the European bison enclosure especially beautiful. It's large and spacious, so not everything is trampled flat. You can actually watch the bisons gazing on lush green meadows here. Further up the slope lies the habitat for golden takins, which used to be home to musk oxen. But in my opinion, given the hillside terrain, the takins fit here much better. Behind the takin enclosure, you get a view of the lower section of the brown bear enclosure. And from there, we follow the path up the hill alongside it. As you can see, this route is anything but accessible, though fortunately there are other paths leading to the upper part of the zoo. The brown bear exhibit stretches quite a distance up the hill and appears at first glance very large and natural. However, on closer inspection, you notice that large portions of the area are cordoned off with electric fencing, presumably to prevent the bears from climbing certain trees or digging under them, which could cause them to fall. The result, though, is that the bears can only move through certain corridors of their enclosure, so it's not surprising to see some pacing behavior here. So in my my opinion, this exhibit is somewhat of a deception. It looks much better at first glance than it actually is. At the very top, along the edge of the zoo, you'll also find a wolf enclosure. It's relatively elongated and can be viewed quite well from one spot across a moat. From here, we make our way through the beautiful natural scenery towards the domestic and farm animal section. This area is centered around an old estate, where you can also stop for food and drinks. Fittingly, the entire section feels a bit like an open-air museum, an impression that's further reinforced inside the building, which features plenty of historical farming tools and machinery. There's also a kind of crypt here displaying figures from local legends and folklore. You probably shouldn't go in there with small children though, some of it is actually kind of creepy. Unfortunately, the way rabbits are kept here is disturbing for different reasons. Especially when it comes to animals that are also common as pets, I think zoos have a certain responsibility to set a good example. And that standard obviously isn't met when domestic rabbits are confined in simple boxes. So the diversity of species in this section definitely has its downsides too. What is absolutely wonderful, however, is the view from up here. As you can see, you can look across the zoo and over to the city of Pilsen, a truly beautiful setting. And yes, this is also where we looked down on the snow leopards earlier. On the back side of the estate, you'll find a small room filled with aquariums, mostly featuring rather inconspicuous local species that are here for breeding purposes. Right next to it, there's an area with open-air aquariums, showing native fish as well, including this impressive common carp or an equally striking northern pike. All in all, it's a really well-designed area that once again reminded me I'd love to see more like this. Most zoos have more or less the same standardized indoor aquariums, but this shows there are other ways to present species suited to our climate. Up on the plateau, the path passes a large deer enclosure and then leads into an area dedicated to the Mexican Sonoran Desert. Here you will find species like dull and bighorn sheep, as well as striated caracaras. The absolutely beautifully designed desert house here is home to a range of reptiles, including eastern collared lizards. And from small, living reptiles, we now move on to huge extinct ones, because next up is the DinoPark. It's a separate section of the zoo that can be accessed with a combined ticket or visited independently. But if you're not interested, you can simply skip it. As you can see, there are plenty of dinosaur figures here. Most of them aren't animatronics, so they are just standing still. And to be honest, the area isn't particularly large, meaning the figures are placed quite close together. Still, especially for dinosaur-loving kids, this is probably an absolute highlight. Personally, I wasn't overly impressed, but to be fair, the dinosaur park in Knuthenburg has spoiled me. That one is so immersive that this version simply can't compete experience-wise. Even within the DinoPark, you'll notice several of those same aviaries that you see all over the zoo. You might already notice them and that they all look the same, but they are like mystery boxes. You never know what's inside. Anything from a common pheasant to a Stanford Sulawesi hornbill, which in Europe can otherwise only be seen in Vogelpark Walsrode. And the black-winged starling can also only be seen in 4 zoos across Europe. So even if these aviaries might seem a bit repetitive after a while, they are always worth checking out. Especially for bird enthusiasts who will definitely get their money's worth here in Pilsen. Behind the DinoPark lies a fairly large Asian garden, which is a good reminder that the Pilsen Zoo is also a botanical garden. Scattered throughout the park are several areas dedicated to plant species from specific regions. It's charming and a nice touch, though ultimately it feels more like a complement than a true focus. The emphasis clearly remains on the zoological side rather than the botanical one. The botanical highlight, in my opinion, is the so-called House of Drought. As the name suggests and the video already confirms, it features plants from desert regions. But it's by no means limited to the usual cacti. And in these display cases, you'll find not only plants but also several reptiles living among them. A little further along, the area takes on a more Mediterranean feel, both in terms of plants and design. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that this path leads to the so-called Mediterranean. And while the focus here is once again on plants, there are also various tortoises to see. The diversity of what Pilsen Zoo has to offer becomes even more apparent when you take a look inside a museum dedicated to Jerzy Hanzelka and Miroslav Zygmunt, who became known even beyond the Czech borders through their travel reports. However, I wasn't familiar with them beforehand, and since most of the texts are in Czech, I only fully understood what they did once I researched it for this video. From the museum you can go underground into a tunnel system where, in a very atmospheric setting, you can also find some small animals, from rats and spiders to bats, and even some cavefish. A few marine species can also be seen here, which isn't quite as fitting. Still, it's a really cool area that reminded me a bit of the grotto in Paradisa. The route through the forest eventually leads towards the Amazon section, where we find a rather unassuming building with a few outdoor aviaries. Here you will find various marmoset species, as well as some birds, Zara's night monkeys, and prehensile-tailed porcupines, animals I generally enjoy seeing, just not when they show problematic behavior like this. I only really like the large aviary on the hillside behind the building, which is walk-through. Various birds live here, such as the green arasaris and rarities like the great kiskadee. And on the ground there are also agoutis. From here we head geographically north, where we first encounter a skunk in a spacious hillside enclosure. Next door, both Canadian lynxes and bobcats live in generously sized, beautiful naturalistic hillside enclosures. Down the slope is a typical South American mixed species enclosure, though the animals weren't exactly photogenic here. But who am I to complain when I got so many great shots of a maned wolf? In such a densely planted enclosure where the animals can easily retreat, I can really count myself lucky. In this part of the park you will also find collared peccaries, and in this very large enclosure muntjacs roam around. Geographically a bit out of place here, of course. A bit further on there's a large vulture aviary, which naturally benefits from its hillside location. Here you will find griffon vultures as well as northern bald ibises. And last but most certainly not least, we head into the Madagascar house. And this place really offers an insane diversity of species. You will find a number of reptiles from Madagascar here, including rarities like the noisy comba ground boa or the southeastern girdled lizards. The cutest in my opinion were the East African black mud turtles. Alongside a small aquarium, there are also flying foxes, giant jumping rats, and white-tailed ensangi, another real rarity. And of course, above all, there are tons of lemur species. These include red ruffed lemurs, black and white ruffed lemurs, black lemurs, brown lemurs, red-bellied lemurs, crowned lemurs, white-headed lemurs, and Lac-à-la-Outre bamboo lemurs. Most of these lemurs are fairly common in European zoos. The biggest rarity, the western fat-tailed dwarf lemur, which is kept nowhere else in Europe, I didn't get to see unfortunately. Still, it was just incredible to see so many lemur species in one place. It's honestly amazing what's living here all on one attic. At the same time though, this already makes clear what the the problem is. Some of the indoor enclosures aren't particularly large on their own, but the real issue is that there simply aren't enough outdoor spaces for all these species. On one side of the house, the lemurs can cross over to a lemur island, which is actually a pretty nice outdoor enclosure. On the other side, there are 3 relatively small outdoor aviaries. In front of the house is another outdoor enclosure, but here you will find ring-tailed lemurs. You might have wondered already why the most common lemur species hasn't been mentioned before. But of course, they are also here. And as you can see in these shots, they even had adorable babies. But we have to consider them a bit separately because their indoor enclosure is actually on the ground floor, where there's also a medium-sized zoo shop. And if I saw correctly, their outdoor area is only accessible to them, so it's not part of the rotation. And so in the end, only 4 outdoor enclosures have to be enough for far more lemur species. And since all species seem to be strictly separated, it means the animals often can't get outside, only on rotation. Or more precisely, like you see here for the red-ruffed lemurs, they might be able to go into a corridor that theoretically leads to an outdoor enclosure, but it might be blocked because another species is occupying it. I have no idea how often the animals are rotated outdoors, but in any case, it doesn't have a good effect that they sometimes have to stay in their relatively small indoor enclosures. And that really sums up my main issue with Pilsen Zoo. It's incredibly species rich, but at least partly that comes at the expense of animal welfare. That doesn't apply across the board. Not everything here is terrible by any means. Some enclosures are genuinely very well done, but also knowing that behind the scenes there are many more species and rarities being kept, I can't be fully enthusiastic. Even just on display, it's clear that seeing so many different species, including all these rarities, is truly wonderful and definitely adds to the zoo's appeal, but it's also hard to experience it all without at least some mixed feelings. Admittedly, the lemurs we just saw were probably the extreme example of this. Overall, I would say that roughly as many enclosures stand out positively as negatively, with most of them falling somewhere in between on a fairly average level. From a visitor's point of view though, Pilsen Zoo also benefits from a truly beautiful park setting, which makes great use of the hillside terrain. And with little surprises like the museum, the additional DinoPark, and of course the fact that it's also a botanical garden, it's fair to say that the zoo has a lot to offer and it's definitely worth a visit. So I certainly don't regret that we planned 2 full days here, even though you can definitely do everything in one single day, but if you're ever in Pilsen and have the time, definitely do spend a day at the zoo. And if on the other hand you are coming here just for the zoo, don't make the same mistake we did. Be sure to check out the city as well, which I've heard is very much worth seeing. I, on the other hand, really only visited the zoo. There is also an additional aquarium and terrarium building run by Zoo Pilsen in the city, which we didn't visit simply because we didn't realize it existed. But our journey through the Czech Republic didn't end here. There were plenty more zoos to come. I've already shown you 4 of them by now, but I have also visited 3 more, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss those and all the other zoos across Europe as well. And of course, I'd love to hear from you. Which zoos in the Czech Republic would you love to visit? Does Pilsen make your list? Or if you have already been there, what's your impression of the zoo? As always, a thumbs up and a bit of hype for the video really mean a lot. And with that said, thanks for watching, take care and see you soon. Yours truly, Martin. Or as we say in Germany, hyper hyper, we need the bass drum. Come on, hyper hyper, hyper hyper. It's so beautiful to see your hands in the air. Put your hands in the air. Come on, this is Scooter.